All right, if we can have everybody's attention, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, the Governmental Affairs Committee. And as always, would one of the representatives down there like to open us in a word of prayer?
Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, Lord God, we just thank you for the beauty of this day, Lord. We just pray that you would be with us as we conduct the affairs of this state, and that everything we do be good and pleasing and perfect in your sight. And all these things we ask and pray in Christ Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. We're here today to hear one issue. That's Senate Bill 122. We're working from an LC 285694S. And I believe if the author wants to make his way to the whichever microphone you would prefer. I'll say that this has been a exciting bill. I know there's a lot of interest in this bill. We've had lots of people working very hard on the bill, working on trying to get this sub brought forward. Cannot say that everybody's for it, but I know that there's been a large group of people that have come together in the business community, water. The cities and the counties certainly have an interest in it, and we appreciate Chairman Tolleson, you're bringing this forward, and we'll give you a few minutes to present to the committee, if you would. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you and appreciate your committee and appreciate your work on also trying to make some clear up language and stuff in the bill, and it's really been a good perfection process. What I've tried to do on number one on the water policy that we deal with in general is to make sure that what we're doing is giving good water policy that's balanced for the entire state of Georgia, because the issues range from all over the state. So that's what I'm trying to do and stay focused on the water policy. We've had public-private partnership bills in the past that skewed away from what we're really our real intentions are, and that's the pure water policy of the state. So this bill is a clean bill. It just focuses on water policy. Section 1 of the bill just describes the definitions of the different entities that would be involved in a water project, whether it's an affected local government, lead local authority, a local authority, a local governing authority, in other words, a county or a municipality or consolidated government, and then the project, whatever the project it is that we're working on. So those are just the definitions of the different entities that would be involved in putting together a project. 3691-101 really just authorizes the different entities to enter into contracts. Enter into contracts with private persons, firms, associations, or corporations. So this kind of sets up that ability for them to do that. Then it talks about, moving on down in that paragraph, that the contracts will provide for a reimbursement process in that. In other words, how are you going to pay that back? And then the local governing authorities and local authorities, it's whatever they deem appropriate. So this bill is really drafted for local control and local projects, and them being in total control of that. And that's one of the things that I really like about the way we finally got the bill drafted up. Paragraph B talks about local governing authority and local authority, being able to obtain federal or state or local assistance funds anywhere they can to help with the project. Paragraph C, you hear talk about eminent domain, and what I put in the bill, the reason I even mention eminent domain is just to make sure that everybody's clear that we're not changing any laws of eminent domain, that local control and local governments control that whole process. So this bill does not change any law dealing with eminent domain. And the reason I put that in there was in the prior bills that have gone through, there has been some question about eminent domain, and one bill even actually tried to change that process. So I wanted people to feel real comfortable. So that's basically a statement letting you know that eminent domain stays in law as is, and this bill has no impact on eminent domain. Moving down 36-91-102, starting on about 64, line 64, and that may be, I hope, the same line as y'all's. Basically, they're talking about this is an alternative means of financing for local government. If you think about what all we've done in the last few years with the statewide water plan, and last year's conservation bill has got a tremendous amount of potential work that's going to have to be done by water systems all over this state, the entire state. We don't need to get focused on, as the articles like to, about just Atlanta. It's about an entire state issue. There are a lot of different facets to water planning that are going to be done all across this state. This is just stating that this is an alternative means, basically, of financing for local governments. They don't have to use it. If they want to build a reservoir, this is a means for them to have a public-private partnership on that, but that is a reservoir for consumptive use, for water to help solve problems with, or an infrastructure problem. This is just an alternative means for them to fund those projects. They don't have to use it. This is just up to the local governing authorities whether they want to do that. You may have multiple governing authorities go together to do a project. So they may come together and do a project, and if they do that, then those groups would get together and they would decide who is going to be the lead local authority out of that group. That just being that someone has got to take the lead, and then the others all participate in that process and all. But that this sets up that ability for them to all designate a lead local authority, and then that lead local authority will help evaluate the project. They'll work with all those local government entities that are involved in it, in helping to evaluate the project, and also work with the get the advice and input from the Water Supply Division of GFA if they so desire. Then about line 82, second paragraph, the lead local authority then can put out written requests for proposals. If they've got a project and they've defined this project and they laid out all the factors in this project, then they put out a written request for proposals, and then people will that written request has to go out 90 days prior to, a minimum 90 days prior to the proposals time for them to be back in, and so those proposals start coming back in, and upon receipt of those proposals, once they're back in, all the proposals, and that time has expired for proposals to come in, then there's a 30-day comment period for public comment on those proposals that would then take place. Then also during that time period, there has to be public hearings through every jurisdiction that's participating in this particular project. So you'll have public comment, then you'll have public hearings with plenty of public comment there. So it's a good process of how to make sure that the public is involved in having their voice heard on any project. Then we move into a discussion period. The lead local authority will set up a discussion period where each respondent that responded to the request for a proposal then are talked to, and they're interviewed, and they have interviews to make sure that everybody is able to actually fulfill their obligation, because you may have people that bid on a project and you get to interview them and you go, well, I don't think they're really financially solid, or don't have enough history to actually fulfill their duties to make this project happen. So you go through those informal interviews, and then that moves to the discussion stage, and the discussion stage starts to get a little more in depth, and the talk about the cost of the project and all the different issues there, and then and those are not public meetings. Those are just meetings with people that are going to bid on this process to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody has an understanding of how the projects are to be dealt with. And then at the conclusion of the discussion stage, they'll select in order, the lead local authority will select in order a preference of one or more of the respondents who seem to be qualified to actually do the job. And then they'll go into negotiations once they've solidified the companies or entities that can do that job. Then they'll go into negotiations with the different companies, and they'll work through that process, and then they'll start to select people that for the final selection of who really can perform that role. But that final selection will be done in a public hearing, in a public meeting, so that all discussion and debate can take place, and people in the general public can be involved in that process. They can set it up to have multiple contracts in a project, or they can set it up where they only have one person. That depends on the size of the project and the scope of the project. And so they may have multiple awards in the contracts, or they may award it to one entity. And then there's also a paragraph 162, line 162. I hope that's same on your copy. It just provides for a resolution of disputes for binding arbitration through the American Arbitration Association. Then there again, we get down to about 169 just states that local government authorities and local authorities that they can promulgate rules and regulations if they need to help with part of the with the project. And then also you get into 172 and down, and that's basically the revolving door policy that we usually have, and that is just saying that if we pass this bill and the governor signed it into law, I can't quit the next morning and go to work for one of these companies. I have to wait a year for that to take place if somebody wanted to go get a job. And that also rose down to the local level on that. So that also anybody that's involved in this process can't get a contract signed and then go to work for those people the next morning, because that's just a little bit of a conflict of interest. So we got that revolving door policy in there. Section 2 talks about GFA, and the division may evaluate any project to determine the desirable levels of state or private participation. The GFA will work with local governments and local authorities to have input on that. Division can also propose projects. The division, the Water Supply Division, is going to be doing a lot of studying all across the state on water needs around this state. And if they see something that they feel like in a region that may be a positive, they can actually propose a project, but the local governing authorities can say, well, we don't want to do it, and it doesn't occur. It's just something that if they see a project that might be beneficial, that GFA would then go out and propose to the local governments. But there again, it stays in control of the local governments. Local government authorities can ask GFA to participate in a project. They also can, in writing, write to GFA and say, we want you to be the participating lead local authority in a project. And the reason I think that's probably pretty good is you get away from heavily populated areas that have, I guess, more dynamic government entities and water supply systems and things like that. You may get out into rural areas where 3 counties want to go together to do a project, but they don't feel like they have the expertise. They can ask GFA to be the lead local authority in that. And if GFA agrees to do that, then they'll move forward with that. Basically, the rest of the paragraph D from 203 down just talks about if GFA does that, then they got to do the public notice, and they have to, the director, the designated representative is the director of GFA then on a project like that, and it just steps through basically things that GFA can and can't do. Then really we get back to about line 245, and there again we restate again that the power of eminent domain does not change. It stays with the governing authorities. And I just keep putting that in there to reiterate to people that this bill in no way impacts the power of eminent domain. Also, if some different entities go together and put a project together, and once they sign that, it may conflict with the service delivery agreements because it will be a regional project. And once they sign an agreement to do this, then that amends the delivery service agreement so that the project can go forward. And then the last section again, I go back and put again the revolving door policy to make sure that that we're very clear. I want to be very clear on the eminent domain and very clear on the revolving door policy. And then that is the end of the bill. It's not a long bill. It's a clean bill. It's a bill that we feel like we've worked on for quite a long time over the fall and all to get it perfected, to make sure. My total goal is to make sure that as we move forward in water policy, that we stay focused on the end game, and that's creating more supply and making our systems more efficient. The infrastructure needs on this state are going to be large. If you remember Senate Bill 370 last year, it had in there that all water systems will have to do leak detection over the next few years. I imagine that's going to have a lot of cost involved with it when they find out how much water they're losing. You've got old systems all across this state, and these kind of things, this kind of tool right here will help those systems if they need to redo their infrastructure. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Senator. You have several questions. Representative Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill for our consideration. I appreciate the hard work you've done on it. I have a few questions I wanted to go over with you. Beginning on, and we're working, I note, from LC 285694S, is that correct? Okay.
Yes, I do, and I've got the. I'm gonna see if both of mine are right together with each other.
Okay. On page 2 at line 56, I wanted to ask you about the use where it says a local governing authority or local authority may agree to make grants or loans to the operator of a project. Mm-hmm. I would ask you, would you not agree that the term grants being included in that would make this violative of the gratuities clause of the Georgia Constitution?
I really don't think so, and the reason behind that depends on the structure. It'll depend on the structure of the deal, what the local governments are doing. They may have basically a project that they put together, somebody finances, but actually that local governing authority owns that project. So they may fund through grants or loans parts of the project, but if it was a pure and simple, somebody else owned it, the local government would never own it, then I could see that conflict. But this is kind of, it's a broader situation where it's going to depend on the negotiation of the contract and what the project is. So there's I think for sure there's the opportunity where they may have the ability to use some grants and loans where it still is going to be actually a local project owned.
What you're telling me, though, is that you're envisioning circumstances where a grant might be appropriate or might not be violative of the gratuities clause, but a strict reading of this would be violative. So would not additional language either be necessary or that term need to be taken out in order to make sure that we're not sanctioning a violation of the gratuities clause?
We've actually had discussions on that, and I think at the end of the day, if you basically read the whole bill and look at the concept of the whole bill, the bill is about local governments and their projects, and I think that you're actually not giving money to another entity for that entity's ownership. So I don't think we have that conflict.
All right. Going on to the eminent domain issue, beginning in lines 59 and 60 and carrying over to line 63. That subsection C provides nothing in this article shall be construed to delegate the power of eminent domain to any private entity with respect to any project commenced or proposed pursuant to this article. Is that the language that you're citing when you say that it doesn't make any change or expand the use of eminent domain?
Right. I could have left eminent domain out of the whole bill because we're not changing any law. We're not changing law. We're not changing the eminent domain law.
Well,
this is basically a statement letting you know that.
Okay, but there is something that concerns me about that. If you read on where it says any local governing authority may exercise the power of eminent domain in the manner provided by law, etc. And I have had distributed for the committee members a copy of OCGA section 22-1-1, which is a definitional section under the eminent domain title. And in that section, subsection 9A defines public use. And it says public use means, and the second definition is the use of land for the creation or functioning of public utilities. And then in subsection 10, public utility means, and I'm going to take out the parts that are not relevant, but public utility means any privately owned line, facility, or system for producing, transmitting, or distributing water. So under that current law regarding eminent domain, if we just leave it like it is, then a local governing authority could use the power of eminent domain in order to benefit a private utility. Is that correct?
Actually the way in what it says,
water utility. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but what it's saying here is that only the local governing authority has the power of eminent domain. This is telling you that the private entities do not have that power. Okay,
but I thought we went a few years ago when we dealt with eminent domain. We took great efforts to make sure that the governments would have that power, but it was not to be used to benefit strictly private entity. And under this, under what I've just cited to you, without some sort of corrective language in the bill, it makes me fear that a local government could, in fact, exercise eminent domain on behalf of a private water utility in the context of this bill.
What I think this is saying, and what it's telling me is that, number one, these projects are for the good of their citizens. In other words, you're not going to come, if my hometown of Perry, Georgia, needs to do a project and wants to do a public-private partnership on this project, it's not for the good of anybody, it's for the good of the citizens of that area. And so these projects are going to be for the good of the citizens. They're not going to be for, Six Flags Water Park or something like that. This is for delivering the water infrastructure to help the citizens not go dry.
Okay.
So I think it just depends on, you're kind of reading into it that there may be, and I understand your question, but you're reading into it that you might be going over to help this company, but you're really not. You're going to help the good of the people. It's for the citizens, and that's the only people that's why we want just to make sure that people understood that only the local government could deal with eminent domain.
Well, to piggyback on that, an amendment that I will be offering at some point, as is appropriate when directed by the chair, that would you be opposed to some language that would basically require that there be good cause shown in writing for a project to be undertaken, such as contemplated here, and it to have been found feasible and in the public interest?
I'd really have to think about that.
Well, I thought you just said it had to be in the public interest.
It does.
Okay.
And the law, the current eminent domain laws, you're not going to be, you're going to be living by the current law. I mean, that law of eminent domain is in Georgia law, and that's what's going to guard the people as citizens. Our current eminent domain law. And it's like you said, we took great strides a few years ago to really help clarify that division of law, that part of law of eminent domain, and that's why. And so eminent domain, we are covered by Georgia current law now.
Okay, just a couple of other.
And I really could have left eminent domain out of here because it's by law, but I wanted people to feel comfortable that nobody was trying to do an end run around anybody.
Just a couple of other things, and I will defer to someone else, but there is no provision in here for the requirement of a performance bond to be obtained by a contracting party with a local government. And in the event of a default, what sort of security does local government have?
Well, I think local governments, and at least in my experience so far, they don't go out and do a contract with somebody, and especially a contract of any magnitude, that they don't. I mean, this is up to the local government to put together their contracts on every project, and they'll. I would think, and I think from my area, I think you probably any big project like that, they're gonna have a performance bond.
Well,
I don't have to tell the local government everything they got to do. Local government, I actually believe in them, and they're not gonna go out and build a water utilities plant and just let some guy take off and build that plant.
Well, then, based on your comments, I would assume you would not have a problem then with including a provision that requires a performance bond.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're saying that evidently local government right now doesn't have a clue what they're doing.
Well,
actually, I think they do.
I would say to you that I think some local governments have more resources than others, and some local governments tend to be more sophisticated than others. But if we all agree, if you and I agree, and the committee agrees, that it's a good idea and that's something local government should know to do and ought to do, why not go ahead and just put it into the statute?
Well, I'm just saying that I think that, and that's. And when you say some don't have the resources, that's why I put in here for GFA to be able to be that local authority, lead local authority to help governments that aren't as, they may be a little more rural. They don't have the expertise on staff to do these projects. And that's why we put in there that they could then request GFA to be the lead local authority.
Okay. My last question is on page 7, lines 233 through 237. And I'm going to refer back to line 220 as the lead up to this. In discharging its duties and responsibilities under this code section, the division may enter into agreements with local governing authorities, local authorities, or an owner or operator or proposed operator of a project, setting fees to be paid to the division or the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, for the purpose of enabling the division or the Department of Natural Resources to expedite or enhance the state or federal regulatory process. Mm-hmm. That almost smacks of some sort of bribery, does it not?
Well, it really doesn't. What they're basically saying there, if they're entering into these contracts, they've got to be paid for any kind of permits and things like that we have to gain. Those have to be paid. I mean, it's just like anything. You're not going to do them they don't do them for nothing.
It's saying to expedite or enhance the state or federal regulatory process. If you're expediting the process, doesn't that imply that there's some sort of influence being brought to bear to make it happen faster?
I really don't. I can't. I really can't agree with that. Okay. I really can't. If I guess in a twisted sort of way, you could look at it that way. I'm not saying you're looking at it in a twisted way, but I'm saying
we live in a twisted world.
We do, but I'm not looking at it from that standpoint. It's just like getting a passport. You can pay a little more to get a passport, I guess, expedited versus unexpedited, and it's the cost involved in that. And so I don't look at that as crooked.
I don't know. I'm sure that down let's just say in other foreign nations, sometimes officials may say, well, they can get something done faster in exchange for payment of fees and things of this nature. And I think that we look at those sorts of requirements and say, hey, that's that's corruption. But
well, I guess you could really not have you could do that in general in anything. I mean, I could go file for a permit on something right now, whatever, and say, hey, I'm going to slip you more money, pay you more to get that expedited, but I don't think that would occur.
But
Because there's a process.
I'm going to wrap it up after this.
There's a permitting process that's there.
But what you're saying is that if you pay extra fees, then you can get it done faster. That the division's going to put you at the head of the line, or they're going to grease the skids for you in order to get that to go through.
I don't look at it as greasing the skids. I look at it as sometimes you can pay extra costs of them having more staff work on that to help get that process done, where they would have to, maybe they would have, I'm just saying, one staffer doing it. Maybe you can pay extra to have an extra staffer help with that process. That's what it is.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Representative Oliver.
Thank you, Senator. May I direct you to line 172 at the top of page 6 on my copy, which relates to the conflict of interest.
I'm sorry, 172?
Yes, sir, line 172 on page
Right.
6 on
Okay.
my copy, which relates to the conflict of interest. When this bill left the Senate, am I correct that the conflict of interest was defined as 3 years?
That's correct.
Would you please tell me why you're lowering it to 1, and is there a special project or entity that's involved in requesting
No, there's
that
not
lower?
anything. Where a lot of that was coming from, actually was kind of local government, so I was getting a little pushback there. And then we also, our normal, I think if you look at our normal revolving door policy that we have at the state of Georgia, I think most of them are 1 year. So that's why I was taken back to 1 year. I don't care if it's 10 years, but I'm just saying that really is one of the reasons.
Would you object if it went back to 3 years?
Personally, I don't have conflict with that. I'll leave that up to the chair. And
may I also ask a question on page 5, line 158, paragraph 5? I don't do construction law, but I'm trying to put this mandatory American arbitration clause in the context of a public dispute. Arbitration proceedings are not public entities, and most arbitration clauses that are mandatory, as this one is described, eliminate the opportunity for litigation where there is a public analysis. I'm trying to figure out whether there's a specific purpose in this is to shortcut litigation in a way that I'm concerned about will eliminate standing opportunities for other environmentalist groups or other entities to participate. And
no, this is really looking at if you had 6 people bid on this job, okay, and somebody had a dispute at the end. This is just saying that there's a binding arbitration resolution for dispute of that.
would you object if that were a may instead of a shall?
If that's unusual. We go back from shall. I'm usually always fighting the opposite battle on that. I don't know what that would really do to it from a legal standpoint.
Well, I'm trying to figure out whether or not you really intend to eliminate the litigation opportunity.
No, what the intent is to make sure that if somebody has a disagreement, then they go on to arbitration and it's solved at that point. That's what the intent is.
But
there's no intent.
But most times that eliminates, people waive their right to litigate when they choose, when there's a mandatory arbitration clause, and that's if that is the specific intent.
Well, I'll just tell you what the intent of this is that if somebody does have a dispute from not getting the contract or whatever, then they can go to arbitration, and that's the only intent of that.
And I have one follow-up question. Mr. Hatfield's concerned about paragraph 5 on line 233. Is there any other example of either a local entity or a corporation paying the fees of a permitting process that you could direct me to? I mean, I know in some general way Georgia Power pays the fees of their rate analysis with the PSC, but I really don't know that as to whether in any other entity before EPD whether they pay the fee of the permitting. I just don't know. Is this unusual?
I'm trying to come up with a bill we passed a few years ago. My mind just sometimes loses track of things. But there was also in there where you could actually the entity that was wanting to get the permit could pay the fee to have them bring more people on to help that process through. And it's covering the cost so that state government would not be covering that.
The kind of the language that's a little bit problematical to Mr. Hatfield that does raise the question is expedite or enhance. I mean, if you took out expedite or enhance and just said to perform the state functions, it sounds a little bit more neutral. But if there are other entities that pay application fees in the permitting process, I'd like to know how that works.
And I wish my mind could bring up that bill, but it was a EPD bill that we passed, and for God, the life of me, and I think I even carried the bill.
Somebody
I can't remember.
out there probably knows.
But it was a process where they the permit the business wanting that permit could pay more to have it expedited, and that was so that EPD could have somebody brought on to expedite that. And so they were paying more to expedite it, but there was, because they didn't want the government to be paying to expedite it. And it was not expedited, it was expedited from just the process of everything that had to be done for that permit.
The city of Decatur isn't going to pay, it's the ABC developer that's going to pay, in your thinking.
Right.
For the expedition.
Right.
And if I were the corporation standing somewhere in line on some other that didn't have some other statutory opportunity to enhance by position in line, I sure would be irritated.
Well, and I think what it was is that they could bring on and I'm really stretching to get the actual facts of that in my brain, but they could bring on somebody from outside that is that deals in environmental permits and pay them to help with the process, and it was just to shrink that time. But it was because the state doesn't have so many employees, and they got fewer today than they've had in a long time to work on permits, and it was for them to be able to bring somebody on to help with the permitting process, and that's all it was for.
And
it's just to help with that permitting process.
Any other questions?
And I can't remember.
In the essence of time, we'll give you a chance to think about that while we take any testimony from the field, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Having no other questions at this point, I think we have 6 people that have signed up to speak on the bill. And as we agreed earlier, if y'all want, brevity is rewarded. We have an insurance committee coming into the room in 15 minutes. So if we want to give these people an opportunity to come forward and speak for no more than 60 seconds, I think was what we had talked about each. Katie Kirkpatrick. And the rest of y'all could be ready to come forward.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me come
Say
and speak.
your name and who you represent,
Katie
please.
Kirkpatrick, and I'm with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And I'm also here, for brevity, I'm also going to speak on behalf of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce as well. We are here in support of this bill, and if you look back over the last several years, we've been working very diligently on the 3 C's, conservation, capture, and control. And this body passed the Water Stewardship Act last year that really set this state as a national example in conservation and efficiency. And we see this as the next step in what we call the silent C, which is capital. We need infrastructure financing for water supply projects, and this gives local governments an option, and we're in support.
Thank you very much. Neil Herring, Sierra Club.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Neil Herring from the Sierra Club. I've spoken to all the members of the committee about this bill. One concern, I share the concerns of Representative Oliver and Representative Hatfield. I also would like to point out on page 3, if you look at line 82 on page 3, say the lead local authority shall seek the advice and input of affected local governments, so on. I would suggest that the lead local authority also needs to seek the advice and input of the Georgia State Finance and Investment Commission. The lead local authority in a lot of cases is going to be the Water Supply Division of the GFA, so it's consulting itself and I believe it needs to consult an agency that regularly deals with this sort of project. And there's not going to be so many of these that they would be overburdened. The other point that I would like to make is in support of the need to state a finding for feasibility and for that the projects are in the public interest. And I think the best example of that is Representative Williamson has a reservoir project in his district where the feasibility study was flawed and projected a population increase that has failed to occur. And now they're unable to finance their project because their feasibility study was incorrect. This bill doesn't even require a feasibility study, so you could really get yourself out on a limb having spent a lot of money unnecessarily at some point. The final point I'd like to make is that in the bill, in the law that this amends, the reservoir law was written by the predecessor of Mr. Brockway's seat, Mike Cohen, 3 years ago. And in that bill, he provided for safeguards for the property surrounding the reservoirs, if indeed a reservoir is contemplated, that so that the water quality of that reservoir would be preserved. There would be no development around the reservoir. There would be no operation of gasoline engines on it and stuff like that. And I believe that that same language should be used by reference for projects under this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wiley Harrison.
Good afternoon. My name is Wiley Harrison. I represent the Council for Quality Growth, and we support this bill and humbly request your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack Dozier.
Good afternoon. I'm Jack Dozier. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Association of Water Professionals. I stand here to support the bill. This bill would provide an optional funding mechanism to address identified water needs. It makes no changes in environmental rules. And it would not allow projects to proceed without local government approval. Those were key provisions that we worked for, and we appreciate Senator Tollison's leadership on this water policy issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally Clark, will you waive? Or no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
On behalf of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and our members across the state, I just want to echo our support of 122, and we thank Chairman Tollison for his leadership.
Thank you. Mark Woodall.
Mark Woodall with Associated General Contractors. We too support the legislation and appreciate the sponsor who's been very open to receiving input from the impacted parties. We very much support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does the author want to come back down?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also, it was in the Water Supply Act that also dealt with that permitting process also. And actually, the locals can pay EPD to pay the feds to help bring in more help for expediting of some permits. So that's already a process that can occur.
Thank you very much. What's the will of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to do pass.
All right. We have a motion to do pass and a second. Any discussion? We have several. Representative Oliver.
I'm going to offer amendment, Mr. Chairman. So we have a motion to do pass, and I'm going to offer an amendment on page 6, line 172, to change 1 year back to 3 years, which is how it left the Senate, and I believe that amendment would be appropriate also on page 8, line 266.
All right. We have an amendment changing it from 1 year to 3 years. Does anybody care to second that? Second. We have an amendment and a second. Any discussion on that amendment? Representative Bearden.
I think by keeping it at 1 year, it falls in place with the other guidelines for such as members of the General Assembly before they go in the lobby and they got to be out of the General Assembly for 1 year, or just keep it consistent. So I would ask that we stay with 1 year.
This is a bigger deal than lobbying, much more financial impact to many more citizens. And there was a reason that they started out, the drafters started out with 3 years, and I'm going to be respectful of that original reason until I get a real
And my comment, and you asked me earlier, I'll make a comment before I go to the next person, is that the reason it's my understanding that they had intended to change the 3 years, did not, and that the 1 year is much closer to what DOT currently does. And because of that provision, that's what I'm presently supporting is a 1 year. But that is the purpose of the amendment, to change it to 3. Representative Hatfield.
I don't have any further comment on that, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of the amendment to change it from 1 year to 3 years, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. No. Let's take a hand vote on that. All those in favor of the amendment to change it from 1 to 3, let it be known by raising your hand. All those opposed? Amendment carries. It's been changed to 3 years. Okay. Representative Powell.
I have an amendment on line 256, line 260, and line 266. Change the 1 year exclusion to 3 years.
So let me just clarify. You're now changing the other portion from 3 years, from 1 year to 3 years? What lines are these on?
256 deals with the state agency and employees. 260 that deals with members of the General Assembly. And line 266 that deals with local officials and employees.
Okay, so we've got those 3 changes.
Basically changing the 1 year to 3 years before they can be a member of the management or.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Amendment carries. Okay. Representative Hatfield.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to note at the outset that I brought to the chairman's office a substitute which I had prepared and wanted to move on. It's my understanding that, for the purpose of having.
Can I clarify that? I misunderstood what you said earlier, that you were trying to put that in substitute instead of this. You have the ability to offer that. My office did not understand that there was supposed to be a distribution. You just gave it to them, and so okay. I had an opportunity to look through the bill.
In light of the fact, though, that we've started down the amendment process, I've got several amendments, and I'd just like to offer those individually, if you don't mind.
How many do you have?
A few.
I'm just trying to let me ask you this for point of clarification. Are the amendments that you have pretty consistent with the committee sub that you created?
Yes.
Okay. And is it fair to say that those amendments were basically the questions that you presented to the author?
Most of them, yes.
All right. In the essence of time, would it not be quicker just to offer that committee sub if you wanted to?
I would be glad to, subject, well, Mr. Chairman, the only problem we have with that is we don't have any but just the 01 and 02 copies, and I'm sure that the committee members would want to see what they're being asked to vote on, so it's going to be, that'd be a lengthy process, so I can try to go through the amendments quickly.
Well, the other option that we can do is, because I do want to give you every opportunity to do that, is the fact that we have another meeting scheduled tomorrow at 3 o'clock. We certainly could start that meeting off with bringing this bill forward at that time.
Would you, well, Mr. Chairman, I'm perfectly okay with going ahead and trying to plow as much ground as we can today.
Well, we got 3 minutes before the insurance committee comes into here, and I know we're on a tight schedule, and my aide is also in that.
I'll be at the will of the chairman. I will defer to.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? We'll just go ahead and adjourn this meeting and take it up first thing tomorrow. Yes.
Let me just say at 3 o'clock tomorrow I have a committee meeting that I must be at. It's my committee, but I would like to let the senator and everyone else know I do support the bill that's in front of us, although I won't be able to vote on it.
Right. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.